wilt shall be the whole of the law. Thank you for coming out for this lecture tonight. Don't think there's any other announcements I need to make. I don't know. Ben, is there anything you wanted to tell anybody before we start off?
Be yourself.
Be myself. Excellent. Okay. So, all right. So tonight I am going to be, as it says up here, talking about Crowley's Tao, Crowley's view of Daoism, and especially focusing on Liber 21, the King Kong King, which would translate into English as the Classic of Purity. I'm not going to go into who Crowley was and the whole history of him. That's going to have to be for another time or another lecture. I think most everybody here has general familiarity with him, so I'm just going to plow into the subject. All right. So, the Classic of Purity and Stillness. This is it. This is the whole thing. And that's its Chinese characters that are its name. It's actually pronounced in Chinese as best I can approximate, which is poorly. Qing Zhong Jing, something like that. And stop it. I don't know how this transliteration came about. That was from James Lake, who is a translator in the 19th century. He had his own peculiar way of transliterating things. This would be the modern Pinyin version. And Qing Zhong Jing is the best I could do. In Japanese, which I find much easier to pronounce, it would be Shoujo Kyo. But from here on, I'm just going to call it the Classic of Purity and Stillness. So it is a Taoist text, and I first found out about it when I was reading Crowley's Book 4, and I found this little footnote in the preliminary remarks of Book 4, Part 1, and here's what it says. I guess I should set this up. At the beginning of Book 4, in Part 1 of Book 4, Crowley is talking about the system of yoga. And he's talking about the common denominator behind such people as Muhammad and Jesus and Buddha and Lao Tzu, and how they all went off into the wilderness, did some form of meditation, and came back a changed person, with nothing on their back but the rags that they were wearing. And somehow they were able to have this transformative effect on the world. So Crowley was talking about, in Book 4, Part 1, what is it that they did that created this transformation? And he chose in that work to focus on the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali and the 8-limbed yoga, Astanga yoga. But there is this curious note here. He says, we have the documents of Hinduism and of 2 Chinese systems, by which I assume he means Confucianism and Daoism. But Hinduism has no single founder. Lao Tzu is one of our best of all examples, as his system is the best of all systems. We have full details of his method and training in the Qing Zhong Jing and elsewhere, but it is so little known that we shall omit consideration of it in this popular account. There you go. Lao Tzu is the best of all systems, and this is the full system, at least as far as Crowley knew. The editor's notes, let's see if I can move this along here. The editor's notes of the big blue brick version of Magic says, the Qing Zhong Jing was by Xuan, that's as best I can figure out how to pronounce it. Let's see, Crowley published a poetic translation in 1939 as Liber 21, the King Kong King, the Classic of Purity, based on the James Lake translation, which was found in the Text of Daoism Part 2, which was published in 1891. So I'm going to talk more about how Crowley came to do this translation of the Classic of Purity and Stillness in just a moment. Moving along. Crowley only knew of this text through James Lake's previous translation. So there was no other scholarship about this work before then. There's been a lot more scholarship since Crowley passed away, and as I've been telling anybody who's been within earshot with me since I've been working on this, it's a real shame that he didn't know about all the stuff that was uncovered. Now here is what James Lake said about it in his translation. He said, it is attributed to Ko Yuan, or Xuan, a Taoist of the Wu dynasty, so that'd be the years 222 to 277 Common Era, who is fabled to have attained to the state of an immortal, and is generally so denominated. He is represented as a worker of miracles, as addicted to intemperance, and very eccentric in his ways. When shipwrecked on one occasion, he emerged from beneath the water with his clothes unwet and walked freely on its surface. Finally, he ascended to the sky in bright day. All these accounts may safely be put down as the figments of a later time. I should mention that James Legge was a Protestant missionary in China who became a sinologist, so he only believed that one person in history could walk on water, and it was obviously absurd that anybody else did so. Moving right along, Legge says, it will be seen that the text ascribes the work to Lao Tzu himself. Lao Tzu is the legendary founder of Daoism, or original Taoist sage. We'll talk about him more in a moment. He says, and I find it impossible to accept the accounts of its origin, which is assigned by Li Shu Yue to Ko Xuan. Li Shu Yue was apparently a commentator that Legge was reading when he did his own translation of this text. I know nothing more about him other than this reference here. As quoted by Li in the first of some notes subjoined to his commentary, Ko is made to say, when I attained the true Tao, I had recited this king, or this classic, 10,000 times. It is what the spirits of heaven practice, and had not been communicated to scholars of this lower world. And in the quote, he says eventually it went all the way back to the Queen Mother of the West, who is this kind of primal mother goddess in Chinese mythology. So that is what Li claims that Ge Xuan, the supposed transcriber of this, said. And the original text itself was supposedly said by Lao Tzu. So I'm feeling like I made that confusing. Let me restate all that. In other words, Lao Tzu, the legendary founder of Daoism, taught this classic of purity and stillness, and then the great goddess, Queen Mother of the West, passed it down through several sages until it reached the immortal Ge Xuan, who was this drunken sage who could walk on water, according to James Legge. Got it? Okay, cool. So, moving along. Let's talk about Lao Tzu for a moment. This is a picture of Lao Tzu. He supposedly lived in the 6th, 5th century BCE, before the Common Era. Might have lived maybe even a century before that, or later than that, rather, 4th century. Scholars wrangle about the dates. They wrangle about whether he even existed, or who he may have been. Lao Tzu simply means the old master. And in the classic of purity and stillness, he's referred to as Lao Jun, which means the old lord. Let's see. The common story is that he was a librarian in the imperial archives and a soothsayer, kind of fortune teller. He may have been the heir of a long legacy of southern Chinese chiefs. There is a story that in 518, or around thereabouts, Confucius called upon him to inquire about the rites. Later, Lao Tzu retired from the world and rode off into the sunset on an ox, but before leaving the western frontier, he was stopped by a guard at the gate who asked him, or pleaded with him, to please write down some of this great wisdom that you have, which he did, and that is the text that we now know as the Tao Te Ching. So the story goes. Later stories continue to say that when he rode off past the western frontier, he went to India and became the tutor of a young prince named Siddhartha. So this is a little game of one-upmanship that the Taoists and Buddhists were playing with each other in China. Let's see. Lao Tzu is included among the Gnostic saints. If those of you who come to the Gnostic Mass will hear his name is the very first one listed. Crowley considered him to have achieved the grade of the Magus. And Magus, or Magi, are those who have taught, according to Crowley, who have taught a particular magical formula or word to enlighten the world. And in Liber Aleph, chapter 69, Crowley says, First then I speak of Lao Tzu, whose word was the Tao. Hereof have I already written much unto thee, because his doctrine has been lost or misinterpreted, and it is most needful to restore it. For this Tao is the true nature of things, being itself a way or a going. That is, a kinetic and not a static conception. Also, he taught this way of harmony in will, which I myself have thought to show thee in this little book. So then, this Tao is truth and the way of truth, and therefore was he the logos, or the word or meaning of his aeon. And his true name, or word, was Tao. Crowley says that he became enamored of the Tao Te Ching around 1905, 1906. In his preface to the Tao Te Ching, let me show you the version I have here. Let's see. Oh, shoot, I think I have it. Yes, right here. This is the 1995 publication of Crowley's translation of the Tao Te Ching. And in that preface to that, he talks about the time between 1905 and 1906 when he was traveling on horseback through southern China with his wife and daughter. And during those months, he says, during my solitary wanderings among the mountainous wastes of Yunnan, the spiritual atmosphere of China penetrated my consciousness. Thanks to the absence of any intellectual impertinences from the organ of knowledge, the Tao Te Ching revealed its simplicity and sublimity to my soul, little by little as the conditions of my physical life, no less than of my spiritual, penetrated the sanctuaries of my spirit. The philosophy of Lao Tzu communicated itself to me despite the persistent efforts of my mind to compel it to conform with my preconceived notions of what the text must mean. This process having thus taken root in my innermost intuition during these tremendous months of wandering across the Yunnan, grew continuously throughout succeeding years. Whenever I found myself able once more to withdraw from the dissipations and distractions which contact with civilization force upon one, no matter how vigorously he may struggle against their insolence, to the sacred solitude of the desert, whether among the Sierras of Spain or the sands of the Sahara, I found that the philosophy of Lao Tzu resumed its sway upon my soul, subtler and stronger on each successive occasion. But neither, and then a little further down he says, but neither Europe nor Africa can show any such desolation as America. It was therefore during my exile in America that the doctrines of Lao Tzu developed most rapidly in my soul, ever forcing their way outwards until I felt it imperious, nay, inevitable, to express them in terms of conscious thought. It was during the summer of and that's the end of that passage from the preface. So it was during the summer of 1918, he was in America between, I think it was 1914, 1918. It was in the summer of 1918 that Crowley spent a magical retirement on Esopus Island on the Hudson River in upstate New York. And during that time, he attempted a translation, or rather a paraphrase, of James Legg's translation of both the Tao Te Ching and the classic of Purity and Stillness. In his Confessions, he says, the magical retirement proved of critical importance. The week's paddling put me in perfect physical and mental condition. I found an ideal solitude on Esopus Island. I began at once to work on a new translation with commentary of the Tao Te Ching. This book, one of the oldest in existence, is surely one of the wisest. But all previous translations, however scholarly, had completely failed to convey the meaning of Lao Tzu. No one has understood what Lao Tzu meant by either Tao or Te. Possessing the keys to the universal Kabbalah, and also experience of the spiritual states which Lao Tzu is discussing, was able to produce a lucid and coherent version of the classic. Those who have seen my manuscript after bitter disappointment with previous translations have instantly recognized the sublimity and wisdom of the Chinese master. So, obviously he was very impressed by Lao Tzu and did his best to kind of spread his understanding to other people. All right, now, Crowley's admiration for Daoism was lifelong, and he actually viewed it as of greater profundity than Theravada Buddhism. In fact, in the Confessions, he says, as will be seen, Buddhism itself failed to win his devotion. He's speaking about himself in the third person. But he found himself instantly at home with the Yi King, the Book of Changes, and the writings of Lao Tzu. Strangely enough, Egyptian symbolism and magical practice made an equal appeal. Incompatible as these two systems appear on the surface, the one being atheistic and anarchistic and quietistic, that would be Daoism, and the other theistic, hierarchical, and active. Even at this period, the East called to him. A little further on in the Confessions, he says, the fundamental weakness of Buddhism is that it fails to attain the indifference of Lao Tzu. Buddha wails for Nibbana, or Nirvana, as the sole refuge from sorrow. Lao Tzu despises sorrow as casually as he despises happiness and is content to reach equably to every possible impression. The last talk I gave here was about Crowley and Theravada Buddhism, so I want to again mention here that Crowley's whole idea of Buddhism was confined to Theravada, or from a Mahayana point of view, Hinayana Buddhism. So even us Mahayana Buddhists, such as myself, would say, yeah, you're right, the Theravada Buddha does have a sour grapes attitude towards life, and even Lao Tzu comes across as more just taking everything in stride. There's no reason to get ruffled or upset. You know, everything's cool. so I could see where this criticism is coming from. But again, it's confined to a particular understanding of the Buddha that I would not agree with either. Ultimately, Crowley characterized Daoism as the yellow school of magic, with the Tao Te Ching as its one perfect classic. So in my previous talk, I went over Crowley's idea that there are three schools of magic, the black, the yellow, and the white, which he says, let's see, he writes in the Magic Without Tears in the letters, it is customary to describe these three schools as yellow, black, and white. The first thing necessary is to warn the reader that they must by no means be confounded with racial distinctions of color, and they correspond still less with conventional symbols such as the yellow caps, yellow robes, black magic, white witchcraft, and the like. The danger is only the greater that these analogies are often as alluring as they prove on examination to be misleading. So I think probably the idea of black, white, and yellow is inspired by alchemical color symbolism, which I will not get into here. But the idea is that the black school of magic takes a very skeptical, or, well, he says skeptical in some places. In other places, it's obvious he means nihilistic. You know, everything's meaningless and awful and terrible, and it's a shame that we're even born in the first place kind of attitude. The white school takes an attitude that everything is really bliss. If you could just get past the ignorance and defilements that keep you from seeing that. And the yellow school is one that is, let's see what he says here. This is another passage of Magic Without Tears. I'm not going to read all that, but he basically says it takes a more skeptical, almost scientific attitude towards things. And he compares it to the Stoicism of Zeno, or Pickwickianism, here, a character from Charles Dickens. And finally, in Magic Without Tears, Crowley says, our own school, by which he means Thelema, which would be the O.T.O., our own school unites the ruby red of blood with the gold of the sun. It combines the best characteristics of the yellow and the white schools. So while Crowley became very disillusioned with Theravada Buddhism, it seems that he never felt that way, never got disillusioned with Daoism, and in fact included it as part of what makes Thelema what it is. So that's important to keep in mind. All right, another thing that I want to say about the Esopus Island is while he was there, he had what is called the vision of Jupiter, or what he calls the vision of Jupiter. Jupiter. Okay, I know I'm mispronouncing it, apparently. And this was a vision of great profundity, and in which he felt that he had awakened to the reconciliation of opposites. And in this passage, he says, of this truth, all systems, of this truth, all systems of religion and philosophy become absolutely puerile. Even the law appears no more than a curious incident. I remain absolutely bewildered, blinded, knowing what blasting image lies in this shrine. It baffles me to understand how my brother Magi, knowing this, ever went on. So what it was that he realized just seemed so incommunicable and so beyond anything that he could think of or try to express. This kind of reminds me of the story about St. Thomas Aquinas, who wrote the Summa Theologica, the great 13th century summary of Christian or Catholic theology. And towards the end of his life, after he wasn't even finished with it yet, and he had written volumes, St. Thomas Aquinas had this mystical vision, and he quit working on his writing. And towards the end of his life, it is said that he said, "All that I have written is straw, worthless." So it seems that Crowley felt that he had a similar kind of vision or awakening. And he goes on to say, even the way of the Tao looks idiotic, but then of course, that's what it is. And the idea, and I think what he means by this is not that Daoism is idiotic, but that Daoism has a sense of humor. Daoism itself realizes that whatever is really real is incommunicable, and that you have to have a sense of humor even about your own system and your own teaching. At least that's how this comes across to me. So because he had this vision, I think it was while he was still working or just after he was working on his translation of the Tao Te Ching, it kind of confirmed to him that he really was qualified to tell people what Daoism is, at least, to communicate it to the West. So also a good thing to keep in mind. This is what he says about Daoism. Both this statement and the next one appear in Magic Without Tears, letters he wrote towards the end of his life, and they also appear in the preface to this publication of the Tao Te Ching that he translated. He says the Tao, oh, by the way, this character right here, that's Tao. The Tao is reason in this sense that the substance of things may be in part apprehended as being that necessary relation between the elements of thought which determines the law of reason. In other words, the only reality is that which compels us to connect to the various forms of illusion as we do. It is thus evidently unknowable, inexpressible by neither speech nor by silence. All that we can know about it is that there is inherent in it a power, which however is not itself, by virtue whereof all beings appear in forms congruous with the nature of necessity. So, just mull that over for a while. What I get from this particular passage, and I could be way off base, but just this is my impression, is that he is talking about the forms of thought itself in a way that Kant was talking about earlier. That this is not any particular forms or particular experiences, but the underlying way in which our minds build up experience. And so that is our way, our Tao. The next statement, he says, the Tao is also the way in the following sense. Nothing exists except as a relation with other similarly postulated ideas. Nothing can be known in itself, but only as one of the participants in a series of events. Reality is therefore in the motion, not in the things moved. We cannot apprehend anything except as one postulated element of an observed impression of change. We may express this in other terms as follows. Our knowledge of anything is in reality the sum of our observations of its successive movements, that is to say, of its path from event to event. In this sense, the Tao may be translated as the way. It is not a thing in itself, in the sense of being an object susceptible of apprehension by sense or mind. It is not the cause of anything, but the category underlying all existence or event, and therefore true and real as they are illusory, being merely landmarks invented for convenience in describing our experiences. The Tao possesses no power to cause anything to exist or take place, yet our experience, when analyzed, tells us that the only reality of which we may be sure is this path or way which resumes the whole of our knowledge. What I take away from this is that when we think about our life, our experiences, when we try to talk about, to share our life and experiences, we're only talking and thinking about things in transition and in relation. that there are no just solid block things, static or standing separate. Everything is constantly in this dynamic, interrelated flux, and that is what the Tao is about. Moving along. Now let's speak for a moment about Xuan. He is the one who supposedly wrote down the classic of purity and stillness. His name translates as the Immortal Lord. It has been translated as Ko Xuan or Ko Yuan. Yuan may be a different character altogether. James Lake has different dates for him. These are the ones that modern scholars, or more recent scholarship rather, would ascribe to him, 164 to 244. Let's see.
He's the one on the right, right?
He is this one supposedly breathing fire or smoke. Yes, that would be him. So in the Confessions, Crowley says that this is, again, well, he's talking about his time on Esopus Island during that retreat. I found that my long abstinence from magical practices had injured my powers, his powers of concentration and meditation. I resumed elementary drill and soon got back to my old form. I soon recovered the powers of pratyahara and dharana. That means to be able to turn inward and keep focused on one subject of meditation. My mind became still. The impact of impressions ceased to obsess me. I became free of the illusion of the reality of material things. All events became equally indifferent, exquisite phrases in an eternal symphony. Before moving on, I want to say, especially those who may not be so familiar with Crowley and his works, he's, with Pratyahara and Dharana, he's talking about 2 of the 8 limbs of yoga, which are discussed in part 1 of book 4 of Magic. So if you want to know more about what he's doing here and why he's doing it, I would highly recommend reading that or reading his 8 lectures on yoga. Also, he started this work of getting himself back into meditative shape, so to speak, before he had that vision of Jupiter. Did I say that right?
Yes.
Okay. I soon began to acquire the magical memory to recall my past incarnations. I refuse to assert any theory of what this really means. All memory is a reawakening of ancient impressions. What I was really doing was penetrating to the deeper layers of my unconscious self. When, therefore, I remember my life as Cagliostro or Pope Alexander VI, I am quite willing to interpret the experience as a dreamlike imagination, a dramatization of certain deeper elements in my character. I may, however, argue on the other side that my present life is, almost equally, an artistic representation of my nature. There are also some fairly strong arguments for the actuality of such memories. As far as I can tell, even towards the end of his life, he was ambivalent about whether past lives are something to be taken literally or is just something that is part of the nature of our minds to create stories that have some relation to ourselves. So, he goes on to say, shortly before the time of Muhammad, I was present at a council of masters. The critical question was the policy to be adopted in order to help humanity. My own task was to bring Oriental wisdom to Europe and to restore paganism in a purer form. So this says as much or more about what Crowley was doing as Aleister Crowley as it does about any of his past lives. Nevertheless, he says, before this council, there is a long gap of complete amnesia. I merely remember that I was Ko Xuan, a disciple of Lao Tzu, the author of the King Kong King, the classic of purity, which, by the way, I translated into English verse during this retirement. All I know is that somehow or other I made a great miss, forfeited my mastership, and had to climb the ladder again from the bottom. It is the shame and agony of this which have prevented me from facing the memory so far. So there you have it. Crowley, during that retirement, came to believe that Xuan, the writer of the classic of purity and stillness, was himself in a past life. Also, the part about a great miss, he mentions that in the passage from his diary, which is in the Confessions about the vision of Jupiter, that anyone who has this vision is liable to make a mistake and make a great miss. And I think what he means by that is be so overwhelmed by the transcendent nature of the vision that one no longer tries to communicate or do anything anymore. At least that's the impression I have. Okay, moving along. Now, since Crowley's passing, as I mentioned, several more light has been shed on the Qing Zheng Jing, and several more translations have been made. And I just wanted to share a little bit about scholarship. Sit down at this point. Ava Wang, this is her translation of the classic of Purity and Stillness with a commentary that she translated from, I don't know, one of the earlier Chinese explanations of the text. So this is good to get.
What is it called?
It's just called Cultivating Stillness, a Taoist manual for transforming body and mind. So, I'd like to say I found it helpful, but actually, aside from the bare translation of the text itself, the kind of inner alchemy Taoist explanations were very confusing. So I found myself reading it over and over again. And I will say, it did start to make sense a little bit more each time I reread it, but I'd probably have to read it 20 more times before I could get something out of it. So anyway, there it is. But Ava Wang says about the classic of Purity and Stillness. It is believed to have been written in the 6th Dynasty's era, that would be 250 to 589 Common Era, although it was written in the literary form of the Warring States period, which would be 475 to 221 before the Common Era. This was probably to highlight its philosophical closeness to the Tao Te Ching. A number of ideas expressed in Cultivating Stillness show strong influence of internal alchemy characteristic of the Eastern Han period, 25 to 220 Common Era. Another scholar of Daoism, Stephen Eskildsen, says this short scripture appears to have been in existence by the 8th century. Wang Jie, who lived from 1113 to 1170, the founder of the influential Quan Zhen school, that is the complete reality school of monastic Taoism. He says, which is to this day the prominent school of monastic Taoism, is said to have encouraged people to recite the clarity and calmness and the Lao Tzu, the Tao Te Ching, along with the Buddhist Heart Sutra and the Confucian classic of filial piety. The clarity and calmness is still recited regularly by Taoist clerics as part of their morning liturgy. So, let me reiterate that part. So he's, according to Eskildsen, this text appeared by around the 8th century. It was promoted by the 12th century founder of the complete reality school of monastic Taoism, and to this day, it is still recited daily by the monks in that tradition, along with the classic of filial piety from the Confucian tradition and the Heart Sutra from the Buddhist tradition. Louis Komjati, another Taoist scholar, says of this text, an anonymous text probably dating from the 9th century. This is one of a group of Tang Dynasty, that would be 618 to 907, works that could be labeled clarity and stillness literature. Emerging under the influence of Buddhist insight meditation, or Vipassana, and expressing a form of wisdom based on the practice of observation, the text combines the worldview of the Tao Te Ching with the practice of Taoist observation and the structure as well as some of the content of the Buddhist Heart Sutra Perfect Wisdom. It emphasizes the dual cultivation of clarity or purity and stillness, tranquility. And this is finally one last scholar I will quote here. Livia Cohn gives an overview of the text as a whole. She says, the text first describes the nature of the Tao as divided into yin and yang, clear and turbid, moving and quiescent, and stresses the importance of the mind in the creation of desires and worldly entanglements. It recommends the practice of observation to counteract this. In other words, the observation of other beings, the self, and the mind, which results in the realization that none of these really exists. The practitioner has reached the observation of emptiness. The latter part of this work reverses direction and outlines the decline from the pure spirit to falling into hell. Spirit develops consciousness, our mind, and mind develops greed and attachment towards the myriad beings. Greed then leads to involvement, illusory imagining, and erroneous ways which trap beings in the chain of rebirth, and they sink deeper and deeper into the quagmire of desire that causes them to fall into hell. So, as I said, Crowley no doubt would have been delighted to learn that the text was understood in China as involving the principles of Chinese internal alchemy, and may have been intrigued by the fact that the text is not simply Taoist, but a Taoist assimilation of East Asian Mahayana Buddhism, both in terminology and even in technique. Okay. So, but we're not going to talk about Qing Jing itself. We're going to talk about Crowley's translation of it. There we go. King Kong King. Now, Crowley was aware that his translations would not pass academic muster, and so he said the following in the opening of his Tao Te King translation. This is Crowley. If any sinologist objects to anything in this translation, let him go absorb his yang in his own yin, as the Americans say, and give me credit for an original masterpiece. Whatever Lao Tzu said or meant, this is what I say and mean. So I'm sure that would apply to his translation of the classical purity and stillness as well. So there you go. All right, now we're going to get into it. Before we go through the text, does anyone have any questions or comments? Yes?
I've always thought that the Tao, in relation to what Lovecraft wrote.
What?
I know. Listen, hear me out.
Yeah.
The Tao is essentially Azathoth. I mean,
I could kind of see that, actually, yeah. I mean, The Tao is impersonal. The Tao is the center and source of everything. The Tao is. But, but where I think Lovecraft is looking at it with the cosmic dread. Like this.
Well, the Hun-Tun.
Yeah. Whereas, as Crowley was pointing out, by associating Daoism with the yellow school of magic, Daoism has a much more equanimous way of looking at it. It's nothing to be dreaded and nothing to necessarily be joyful about either. It's just, it is what it is. Which I hate that phrase because I work in the hospitality industry, but that's what it is. It is what it is. Okay. Any other question or comment?
Was that the book that we found in K.O. books?
Oh, no, it's not, as a matter of fact. No, this one's from this library.
Oh.
The one we found at K.O. Books...
It said that, though.
What's that? Yeah, it also said that, right.
Yeah.
This translation, publication or printing of Crowley's Tao Te Ching also includes the classic of purity and stillness in the back. And that one that I got from K.O. was an earlier printing that did not include it. And this one also has a preface forward. What is it called? Has editor's forward by Jimenez Beta, which has a lot of neat information in it. So, whoops. Okay. So let's get into the text here. Lao Jun the this is Crowley right here. And this is the James Lake translation, so you can kind of compare as we go. I'm primarily only going to look at Crowley's. Lao Jun the master said, Tao is devoid of form, yet heaven and earth are brought to birth and nurtured by its norm. I love reading this.
That poetic convention that Crowley just keeps defaulting to, where he has to rhyme every goddamn thing. It's just so,
It is. Before I move on, I just want to say, the Lao Jun, the master, in Chinese that would be Tai Shang Lao Jun, and it means the Grand Supreme Old Lord. And it is a reference to Lao Tzu as kind of a deified personification of the Tao. And that happened around 142 in the Common Era, when a man named Zhang Daoling claimed that Lao Tzu, as Tai Shang Lao Jun, appeared and transmitted to him a revelation called the Classic of Great Peace, which is kind of one of the important Taoist scriptures for religious Taoism. And this was the beginning of the movement that would be known as the Celestial Masters, are the Central Orthodox school of Daoism, specifically religious kind of Daoism. And in 150 of the year 150 of the Common Era, the Han Emperor dedicated a shrine to Taishan Laojun. So prior to that, Lao Tzu was just seen as a great philosopher from a few hundred years back. But starting around the middle of the 2nd century of the Common Era, Lao Tzu is deified. So that's why he's referred to that way here. So now I'll use my cheesy special effects. Thou hath no will to work, yet by its way of heaven, the moon and sun rejoice to run among the starry seven. Thou hath no name, its word is growth and sustenance. To all I aim to give it name, Tao, heaven prosper chance. I'm not sure of that rhyme. But
Sustenance.
sustenance, yes.
Sustenance.
Sustenance.
Consonants.
Yes. Okay. So here we get into some commentary. So what we've learned in this first part of the classic of purity and stillness is that the Tao is great, Tao as great. James Legge associated several passages in the Tao Te Ching with different verses in this, kind of referencing them for further explanation. And that seemed like a nice idea. So we are going to look at some of Crowley's interpretation of the Tao Te Ching. So we have the Tao is great, the Tao as the source and sustenance of heaven and earth, and the Tao as nameless, but we're going to call it the Tao anyway. So let's look at those passages in the Tao Te Ching to see if they shed any further light. This is the very first chapter, a very important one. The Tao path is not the all Tao. The name is not the thing named. Unmanifested, it is the secret father of heaven and earth. Crowley was really into the I Ching, or the Book of Changes, so he put those 2 trigrams there. Manifested, it is their mother. To understand this mystery, one must be fulfilling one's will. If one is not thus free, one will but gain a smattering of it. The Tao is one, and the day but a phase thereof. The abyss of this mystery is the portal of serpent wonder. When I first read this, I read like half a dozen or more translations of Tao Te Ching, and I was like, what the hell? I don't remember the portal of serpent wonder. I don't actually now. I'm not sure that he's that far off. Basically, what he has done here. Well, let me read to you D.C. Lau's translation. D.C. Lau is the one. I don't have it here. It's in the car. It's the Penguin Classic edition of the Tao Te Ching, and D.C. Lau was a great Chinese scholar, translated many important Chinese works into English in the middle of the 20th century. So this is pretty mainstream. This version. The way that can be spoken of is not the constant way. The name that can be named is not the constant name. The nameless was the beginning of heaven and earth. The named was the mother of the myriad creatures. Hence, always rid yourself of desires in order to observe its secrets. But allow yourself to have desires in order to observe its manifestations. These two are the same, but diverge in name as they issue forth. Being the same, they are called mysteries. Mystery upon mystery, you've heard that before, right? The gateway of the manifold secrets. So, I don't think Crowley was all that far off. And one thing that he was trying to do here was associate the unmanifested with Hadith, the manifested with Nuit, and the portal of serpent wonder, perhaps as Rahur Kuit. Although that could also be Hadith. But he's associating it primarily with the Kundalini. And that also would not be far off from some of the Taoist alchemical interpretations of this text, which I'm not going to get into because, frankly, I don't understand them. So maybe a couple years from now, I'll revisit this. Okay, moving along. The decay of manners. These are Crowley's chapter titles. When men abandon the way of the Tao, benevolence and justice become necessary. Then also was need of wisdom and cunning, and all fell into illusion. When harmony ceased to prevail in the 6 spheres, it was needful to govern them by manifesting sons. When the kingdoms and races became confused, loyal ministers had to appear. I'm not going to get into it, but in the footnotes to this, in Crowley's, in that publication, he associates this with different hierarchies in ceremonial magic. So the archangels and the angels and the elementals and such, which I think is an interesting way of looking at it. The 6 spheres in the Chinese text is actually the 6 relations. In Confucianism, they talk about the relation between husband and wife, father and son, older brother, younger brother, and such like, so that there were 6. Crowley associated them with the planets, so he could bring it more in line with his Kabbalistic and astrological interpretation. Let's see if there's anything else to point out here. Yeah, okay. Images of the mystery. Without limit and perfect, there is a becoming. Beyond heaven and earth, it hath not motion nor form. It is alone, it changeth not. It extendeth in all ways. It hath no adversary. It is like the All-Mother. I know not its name, but I call it Tao. Moreover, I exert myself and call it vastness. In the original, the translations that D.C. Lau and others did, it would be, I call it great, or I call it greatness. Vastness, the becoming. Becoming, it flieth afar. Afar, it draweth near. Vast is this Tao. Heaven is vast. Earth is vast. The Holy King is vast also. In the universe are 4 vastnesses, and of these is the Holy King. Man followeth the formula of earth, earth followeth that of heaven, and heaven that of the Tao. The formula of the Tao is its own nature. So if you're into Hermeticism and ceremonial magic and such things, you have, of course, heard the phrase, as above, so below. So here we have it in the Taoist version. Okay. The wisdom of the day. Day, by the way, would generally be referred to as power or virtue. That's how it would be literally translated. The all Tao hath no name. It is that minute point, and here we have the idea of hadith, yet the whole world dare not contend against him that hath it. Did a lord or king gain it and guard it, all men would obey him of their own accord. In other words, you don't have to force things. Heaven and earth combining under its spell shed forth dew, extending throughout all things of its own accord without man's interference. Tao in its phase of action hath a name, then men can comprehend it. When they do this, there is no more risk of wrong or ill success. As the great rivers and the oceans are to the valley streams, so is the Tao to the whole universe. So just like gravity, everything naturally flows that way. The day as the nurse. All things proceed from the Tao and are sustained by its forth-flowing virtue, the day. Everyone taketh from form according to his own nature, and is perfect, each in his particular way. Therefore, each and every one of them glorify the Tao and worship its forth-flowing virtue. This glorifying of the Tao, this worship of the day, is constantly spontaneous and not by appointment of law. Thus the Tao buddeth them out, nurtureth them, developeth them, sustaineth them, perfecteth them, ripeneth them, upholdeth them, and reabsorbeth them. It buddeth them forth and claimeth not lordship over them. It is overseer of their changes, and boasteth not of his puissance. Perfecteth them, and interfereth not with their ways. This is called the mystery of its virtue. The witness of greed. Were I discovered by men and charged with government, my first fear would be lest I should become proud. The true path is level and smooth, but men love bypaths. They adorn their courts, but they neglect their fields, and leave their storehouses empty. They wear elaborate and embroidered robes. They gird themselves with sharp swords. They eat and drink with luxury. They heap up goods. They are thievish and vainglorious. All this is opposite to the way of the Tao. Of course, we can't really relate to this anymore, can we? All right. Zhuangzi was a Taoist sage who followed, 200 years after Lao Tzu, and there is a series of books or chapters that are collectively called the Zhuangzi after the sage. And they would be the second most widely read Taoist literature after the Tao Te Ching in, America and Europe. So this is a passage from that Lake felt was relevant to the first portion of the Classic of Stillness and Purity, where Zhuangzi is talking about different passions. Joy and anger, sadness and delight, hope and disappointment, faithlessness and certainty, forcefulness and sloth, eagerness and reticence, like notes from an empty reed, are mushrooms growing in darkness. Growing in dampness. Day and night follow each other before our very eyes, and we have no idea why. Enough, enough. Relax, chill out. All right. So, the Book of the Law states the doctrine of the Tao very succinctly. This is statements that Crowley made. Thou hast no right but to do thy will. Do that, and no other shall say nay. For pure will, unassuaged to purpose, delivered from the lust of result, is every way perfect. Thus also the sage, this is again from his Tao Te Ching translation, thus also the sage, seeking not any goal, attaineth all things. He doth not interfere in the affairs of his body, and so that body acteth without friction. It is because he meddleth not with personal aims that these come to pass with simplicity. And Crowley wraps up by saying, the ideal analogy seems to be that of a planet in its orbit. It has its true motion. It meets the minimum of friction from circumambient space. When it suffers the attraction of another body, it sways slightly to make the proper adjustment without effort or argument. It can, consequently, continue indefinitely in its orbit. So if you're doing what you should be doing and what it's really in your heart to be doing, there will not be all this excessive stress and strain, and things will go smoothly. And you just only need to make minor adjustments with other people who are also, if they're following their true will. So he felt this was very much in line with what the Tao was about. I think this passage where he's discussing all this is from the Magic Without Tears, although my notes don't tell me where this came from, unfortunately. All right, so let's summarize. The Tao is great because it is natural and harmonious. It is vast and all-pervasive. It is easy, level, and smooth. The Tao is the source and sustenance of heaven and earth. It is the source of things but not a thing. It is non-coercive and unself-conscious, virtuous power. The Tao is nameless but called the Tao. So it's only provisionally named. We're not buying into some kind of concept here or something that we need to convince other people about. The name is only a partial manifestation. So we should never fool ourselves into thinking that we've somehow contained it or fully expressed it. So now we can return to the text. So, Tao hath twin phase with day, the silent and the stressed. Of motion those, of these repose, sublimely manifest. So Legge says, this paragraph is intended to set forth the production of all things, but it does so in a way that is hardly intelligible. And then further on, James Legge says, the fact is that the subject of creation, in the deepest sense of the name, is too high for the human mind. So the idea that God created the world in 7 days is too sublime for the Chinese, that he doesn't get this. Oh, there you go. All right, moving along. Heaven moves, pure silence he. Earth rests beneath the strain. Shuttle and loom, as word and womb, their mystery sustain. Pure motion maketh rest, as silence maketh stress. If man were still, then heaven should thrill with earth to nothingness. James Legge said about this part, I do not understand this, but I cannot translate the text otherwise. All right, commentary now. So, Eskildsen says about the previous passage, the Tao brings forth the world and its phenomena through the interplay of complementary dualities such as clarity and turbidity, motion and stillness, in man and woman. So here we have the two sets that were mentioned that I especially want to draw attention to. The Qing, which is silence, purity, or clarity. Zhuo, which is stress, or turbidity, or impurity. So these are two opposites right here. And then you have Dong, which is motion, movement, or agitation, and its opposite, Jing, which is repose, rest, tranquility, or stillness. For some reason, Crowley translates this as silence. Actually, I shouldn't say for some reason. He has a very good reason for doing it, which I'll get into. Carl Jung, in 2 essays on analytical psychology, says about this kind of pairing of things, old Heraclitus, who was indeed a very great sage, discovered the most marvelous of all psychological laws, the regulative function of opposites. He called it enantiodromia, a running contrariwise, by which he meant that sooner or later, everything runs into its opposite. So you go far enough in one direction, you're going to end up in another. So, now, Qing and Jing, that is purity and stillness, which is part of the title of the text. Eskildsen says, Daoism has always emphasized mental serenity and maintained that good effects will come about from it. To be serene means that the mind is clear, Qing, are free of any thoughts that confuse it. So, oops. Okay. Arg. I didn't want it to do that. Just a second. Okay. Here we go. Okay, that's Qing. That one. Are free of any thoughts that confuse it. It also means that the mind is calm, and that's Jing, without any emotions that agitate it. Taoism maintains that you should foster serenity at all times and in all activities. Activity itself is best limited to only what is most natural and necessary. So non-action, wu wei, is thus frequently enjoined. And I think Crowley would understand non-action as what he said previously, following your true will. Not doing nothing, but doing what's really in your heart, what comes out of your true nature. And then it becomes effortless. It becomes a labor of love. Eskildsen also says, Qing and Jing appear separately 4 and 10 times respectively in the Tao Te Ching. And in chapter 16, it seems to be used in relation to meditation. So, before looking at that, I want to look at why Crowley translated Jing as silence. And he says in Little Essays Towards Truth, this is the essay Silence in Little Essays Towards Truth, for silence is equilibrium of perfection, so that Harpocrates is the omniform, the universal key to every mystery soever. Rahor Kuit is Harpocrates. Harpocrates is rather one side of Rahor Kuit, the silent side, whereas Rahor would be the more active side. He says, this is the true idea of silence. It is our will which issues, perfectly elastic, sublimely protean, to fill every interstice of the universe, a manifestation which meets its course. I praise the luxuriant rapture of innocence, this virile and pantomorphous ecstasy of all fulfillment. I praise the crowned and conquering child whose name is force and fire, whose subtlety and strength make sure serenity, whose energy and endurance accomplish the attainment of the Virgin of the Absolute, who, being manifested, is the player upon the sevenfold pipe, the great God Pan, and being withdrawn into the perfection that he willed, is silence. So, he was packing a lot of meaning into silence, which plays well into the idea of Jing, even though that would not be the literal translation of that character. And keep in mind that the reference to the sevenfold pipe of Pan, because that's pipe reference, is going to come up again. To show that Crowley wasn't too far off here, I would like to read a little bit from the Tao Te Ching, a philosophical translation by Roger Ames and David Hall. They say about this character Jing, stillness, tranquility, that is often used to characterize this posture, far from being simple passivity, is an ongoing dynamic achievement of equilibrium that requires constant monitoring and adjustment. It is important to remember that all correlative pairs entail their opposites in the sense that Jing is tranquility becoming agitated. Thus, tranquility, or Jing, stands in a dominant relationship in its partnership with agitation, dong. It does not negate or exclude its opposite. The same qualification has to be brought to bear on other familiar pairs that might otherwise mislead us. For example, emptiness and fullness, clarity and turbidity, or qing and zhuo, which were also in the previous slide. So silence or tranquility here is not some static, doing nothing, just being a lump. It's something, it's like when a top is spinning. It keeps its place, but it keeps its place because of its movement, maintaining equilibrium. Now here's chapter 16, where the word is used in relation to meditation, although here Crowley translates it as silence. Emptiness must be perfect, and silence made absolute with tireless strength. All things pass through the period of action, then they return to repose. They grow, bud, blossom, and fruit. Then they return to the root. This return to the root is this state which we name silence, and this silence is witness of their fulfillment. This cycle is the universal law. To know it is the part of intelligence. To ignore it bringeth folly of action, whereof the end is madness. To know it bringeth understanding and peace, and these lead to the identification of the self with the not-self. This identification maketh man a king, and this kingliness groweth unto godhood. That godhood beareth fruit in the mastery of the Tao. Then the man, the Tao permeating him, endureth, and his bodily principles are in harmony, proof against decay until the hour of his change. So being able to find that repose is very important. Okay. Another chapter to look at in relation to all this is 65. That's 45. The overflowing of day. Despise thy masterpieces, thus renew the vigor of thy creation. Dream thy fullness emptiness, thus shall thy fullness never be empty. Let the straight appear crooked to thee, thy craft clumsiness, thy music discord. Exercise moderateth cold, stillness heat. To be pure and to keep silence is the true law of all that are beneath heaven. So beware of becoming one-sided. Beware of thinking that you are fully accomplished. Beware of going too far. But also beware of just being a lump, because that's also a way of becoming one-sided. Let's see. Comes heat. Another important thing about this passage right here is right there. Oops. Shoot. Sorry. Let's go back. I keep trying to hit the little light and I hit the forward button. To be pure and to keep silence. That's changing right there. That's the title of the classic, Purity and Stillness. To be pure and to keep silence is the true law of all that are beneath heaven. So this is in the Tao Te Ching. So possibly the classic of purity and stillness was playing upon this earlier passage in the Tao Te Ching and given its title and its theme. And finally, from chapter 61, a state becometh powerful when it resembleth a great river, deep-seated. To it tend all the small streams under heaven. It is as with the female, that conquereth the male by her silence, or in the other translations, by her stillness. Silence is a form of gravity. So D.C. Lau has, a large state is the lower reaches of a river, the place where all streams of the world unite. In the union of the world, the female always gets the better of the male by stillness. So the idea here being that there is a power in being on the receptive end. You know, of course, this is playing in old patriarchal sexist ideas of what's masculine, what's feminine, but going with that symbolism for a moment, it's the idea that it also pays to be on the receiving end, so to say. And that this dynamic goes back and forth. I don't know how else to say it. So, all right. All right. So Crowley Oh, yes. This is a very important line from the previous passages that bears a lot of looking at because it received a lot of attention in Chinese commentaries. Crowley's version has, if man were still, then heaven should thrill with earth to nothingness. Lake had, if man could always be pure and still, changing, heaven and earth would both revert to non-existence. That's terrible. Eskildsen has, because there's no implication of nothingness in the original, or non-existence. Eskildsen says, if a person can always be clear and calm, heaven and earth will all return. And that's what these translation of these characters. If a person can always be clear and calm, heaven and earth will all return. So Eskildsen asks, what exactly does this mean? Do heaven and earth return to you? How and in what sense is this possible? Or if they do not return to you, where do they return to? And where do they return from? Where indeed? So here are some possible meanings. That if you become pure and still, the chi of heaven and earth, which you had squandered, will return to nourish you. So chi is that vital energy that when we breathe in chi. So chi is not exactly the air, but it's carried by the air. It's very similar to prana in yogic practice or in or ruach, sometimes in Kabbalah. Another possible interpretation, heaven and earth will come to be your ally, or your possession, or your responsibility, or will faithfully come to your aid. Heaven and earth become one with you, and you attain magnanimity, wisdom, and moral perfection. That's another possible meaning. According to Neidan, or inner alchemy of China, it could mean the circulation of the chi above the diaphragm and the chi below the diaphragm, corresponding to heaven and earth respectively. So it creates kind of this cycle or flow. In doing this, one achieves not only health, but the creation of an inner radiant spirit that is free and immortal. So reading some of this stuff made me think of the knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel. Well, finally, it could be gaining ritual power. So there is a story where, where this woman is killed by the ghost of a past general, and the husband complains and tries to find a way to get rid of it or have revenge on this ghost, and he's told to see Mr. Tian for help. Wang Gui is the husband. So Wang Gui's wife is killed by this ghost. He goes to see Mr. Tian for help. Mr. Tian was known for reciting the classic of purity and stillness and for fully understanding that verse about heaven and earth returning. So what he does is, Mr. Tian complied with this request for aid by performing a midnight ritual in which he donned his vestments, wielded his ritual implements, burned incense and lighted lamps, closed his eyes, and recited incantations to address the deities of heaven and earth. As a result of his efforts, the Emperor of Heaven sentenced the ghost of General Wei to 300 strokes of the iron rod and banished him to the northern mountain of the shadows to endure 1,000 years of torment. At the same time, it was determined that the spirit of Mrs. Han, or Miss Han, would return to life in the human world by entering the body of a young woman who had just died. So then Wang Gui and his resurrected wife then entered a Taoist monastery. And that's the story. So I found that really interesting because it shows that this text has not only received interpretations according to internal alchemy of energies of heaven and earth, cycling through, regaining health and power, but also ritual magical interpretations. So this is from a ghost hunting movie, and I don't know if you can see it. He's wielding his sword there, and a pearl of power of some sort. Okay. So to summarize, the Tao has both the yang or positive, active aspect, which can be associated with heaven, purity, motion, and also the yin, which would be associated with being more receptive, the solidity of earth, turbidity or disturbance, but also stillness, the more passive, quiet posture. So one must cultivate purity and stillness for the return of heaven and earth. So basically, you're taking the best of yang and the best of yin, the purity of yang and the stillness of yin for proper equilibrium and health. And now we come back to the text. So, self loveth silence, yea, but mind distracteth it. Mind loveth rest, but passion's pest allures the trembling wit. If man restrain desire, his mind will cease to roll, and mind's release allow pure peace of silence to the soul. The senses will not soil, the thoughts will not upstress, nor poisons, greed, wrath, and dullness, breed their triform deadliness. So here are the 6 desires. Well, you see that in lay translation. Crowley kind of glossed it. As a matter of course, the 6 desires will not arise, and the 3 poisons will be taken away and disappear. Here the Buddhist influence is revealing itself. The 6 desires will be the desire for pleasant sights, pleasant sounds, pleasant smells, and the 6th sense with its object would refer to the mind, so pleasant thoughts and emotions. And the 3 poisons would be greed, hatred, and delusion. Although Crowley here has greed, wrath, and dullness, or dullness of mind, not just being boring. Like, hopefully I'm not being right now. So, okay. So the idea is that spirit strives for purity, but gets pulled down by mind. And mind wants stillness, but gets pulled down by the agitation caused by desire. So what needs to happen is that desire and its agitation disappear and things revert back to their proper form, where mind achieves its stillness and that permits the spirit to achieve purity. Let's see. So back to the text. Men earn not ease of Tao, for their desires disease, because their mind is not refined of thought by killing these. If one should slay desires, his mind and body seem no longer his, but fantasies danced in a wanton's dream. Slay mind, slay body, slay the external, matter goes, then space remains, renew thy pains, up, front the final foes. Slay space that naught abides, hold not thy holy hand, when naught gives back before the attack, serene thy silence stand. So here we find in those verses a meditation instruction leading to the apprehension of emptiness that is very similar to Mahayana Buddhist ideas as found, for instance, in the Heart Sutra. So it is, I think it'd be easier to talk about this if we look at that passage as a whole and with a different translation. This is Libya Cohn's translation. Those who can abandon these desires, through introspection observe their minds and see that there is no mind. From outside observe the body and see that there is no body. Then observe other things by glancing afar and see that there are no other things. Once you have realized these 3, you observe emptiness. Observe emptiness using emptiness and see that there is no emptiness. When even emptiness is no more, there is no more non-being either. Without the existence even of non-being, profound and everlasting, all is serenity. So get rid of your mind, get rid of your body, get rid of other people, and then get rid of the emptiness that remains so that even non-being isn't there anymore. Just keep going. Keep getting rid of each thing. So Legge, of course, did not understand this. In the paragraph, he says, or this is Legge's translation of that part, in this paragraph, we have what Mr. Wiley calls the subjection of the mental faculties, and I must confess myself unable to understand what it is. It is probably another way of describing the Taoist trance, which we find once again in Chuangzi, when the body becomes like a withered tree and the mind like slaked lime. But such a sublimation of the being, as a characteristic of its serene stillness and rest, is to me inconceivable. So that was James Legge's reaction to that passage. here's a passage from Zhuangzi that he's referring to as a conversation between two friends, one of whom is in a state of meditation. Master Qi of the Southern District sat leaning forward on his chair, staring up at heaven and breathing steadily, as if in a trance. Forgetful of all around him, Master Yin Cheng Yu stood beside him and said, "What is it? Is it true that you can make the body like a shriveled tree, the heart like cold dead ashes? Surely the man here now is not the same as the one who was here yesterday." Master Qi said, "Yen, this is a good point to make, but do you really understand? I have lost myself. Do you understand? You hear the pipes of the people, but not the pipes of the earth. Even if you hear the pipes of the earth, you don't hear the pipes of heaven." So remember I said the pipes would show up again. So this passage apparently is putting forward the idea that Master Qi had achieved this kind of stillness and purity that both the Tao Te Ching and the classic of pureness and purity and stillness is talking about. And by doing so, was able to hear the music, not just of people and of nature, but even of heaven, of the source of everything, of, as Crowley would put it, the great God Pan. Moving forward. So, Crowley recommends some exercises where we actually do this kind of thing. One of them is Liber Turis. So, let's see. Wherein, in Liber Turis, one attempts to annihilate thoughts, then keep thoughts from arising in the first place, then annihilate even the underlying tendencies that give rise to thoughts, and then to let the true cause of all be unmasked and annihilated. So, keep going back further and further and further through your mental tendencies. Crowley does point out that this is an extremely difficult practice to do. He says in Liber Turis, "Let this will then watch vigilantly the point where thoughts arise, or the point where they are judged, in your head, and let every thought be annihilated as it is perceived or judged." So I always imagine like a Death Star satellite surrounding my head, tapping my thoughts as they come up. And I wonder, as I was reading Liber Turis, if Crowley was thinking about the passage from the Dhammapada, the Buddhist text, where the Buddha says upon his enlightenment to the devil figure, "House builder, you are seen. The house you shall not build again. Broken are your rafters all, your roof beam destroyed. Freedom from mental formations has the mind attained. To the end of craving has it come." So here's a place where Daoism, Crowley, and Buddhism all converge. This idea of trying to observe your thoughts as they arise and get past them or get beyond them. Which, of course, is easier said than done, but there's the exercise, Liber Turis. It's in Gems from the Equinox. I should add, along with some more ceremonial ways of going about that process, he talks about one where you use the banishing rituals to banish all the elements and all the planets and all the signs of the zodiac and all the spheres of the tree of life, and you just successfully banish everything until you're left with nothing. So, there you go. Try that out.
Your spouse, your car,
Yes.
your job.
Right, exactly. So, all right. Now here is how Crowley understood nothing, and how nothing is not really just nothing in terms of the I Ching. He says, but this equation is 0 equals 1 plus the absolute value of -1, which somehow equals 2. Trusting there's no mathematicians in this room who can correct this.
That's true.
Anyway, is it? Is it good? Okay. This is what Crowley said in Magic Without Tears. "The Chinese, like ourselves, begin with the idea of absolute nothing. They make an effort and call it Tao. But that is exactly what the Tao comes to mean when we examine it. They see quite well, as we have done above, that merely to assert nothing is not to explain the universe, and they proceed to do so by means of a mathematical equation even simpler than ours, involving as it does no operations beyond simple addition and subtraction." He's talking about the I Ching, the Book of Changes with its trigrams and hexagrams. They say, "Nothing obviously means nothing. It has no qualities or quantities. But," continue the sages of the Middle Kingdom, It is always possible to reduce any expression to nothing by taking any two equal and opposite terms. We ought, therefore, to be able to get any expression that we want from nothing. We merely have to be careful that the terms shall be precisely opposite and equal. This they then did, and began to diagrammatize the universe as the yi, that means the changes. A pair of opposites, the yang, or the active male, and the yin, or the passive female. So yin and yang kind of cancel each other out. Moving along. As I said, all of this is very similar to the Heart Sutra. So the Heart Sutra is only a page long. This is not all of it. I just tore off the beginning and end. This is the relevant portion. Form is no other than emptiness. Emptiness is no other than form. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. Sensation, perception, volition, and consciousness are also like this. Shariputra, all phenomena are empty of characteristics. They neither appear nor disappear. They are neither defiled nor pure. They neither increase nor decrease. Thus, in emptiness there is no form, nor is there sensation, perception, volition, or consciousness. No eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, or mental phenomena. No realm of seeing, and so on until no realm of mental discrimination. No ignorance, no end of ignorance, and so on until no old age and death. No wisdom and no attainment. Since there is nothing to attain, a bodhisattva relies upon the perfection of wisdom, whereby the mind is unhindered. Because there is no hindrance, there is no fear. Far removed from all inverted delusions, nirvana is realized at last. Few interesting things about this. One is, again, the complete perfection or complete reality school Daoism also recites this text, as well as the classic of purity and stillness daily. Scholars believe that the classic of purity and stillness was probably itself influenced by the Heart Sutra or other Mahayana emptiness literature. Another thing to point out about this is Crowley made a big deal about the 5 aggregates of Buddhism, the 5 things that make up conscious life, which is form, feeling, perception, volitions, and consciousness. And here they appear again, except now they're negated, which is something that I think Crowley would have found fascinating if he had ever read the Heart Sutra. All right, moving along. So, emptiness. Why are things said to be empty according to Mahayana Buddhism? Because they are impermanent and not unchanging. Because they are interrelated and not independent. Because they are mind-created and not apart from perception. They are therefore empty of any objective, inherent existence. So, for those of you who have not read the Book of the Law, the reason for the dogs is because in the Book of the Law it says, "There is a great danger in me, for who doth not understand these runes shall make a great miss. He shall fall down to the pit called Because, and there he shall perish with the dogs of reason. Now a curse upon Because and his kin, Because be accursed forever. If will stops and cries, why, invoking Because, then will stops and does not." So I couldn't help but think of that as I was writing this. I don't have all these whys and because. Does everybody follow the logic behind this, though? You know, for something to not be empty, in the Buddhist way of talking about it, it has to be independent, it has to be able to stand still, it has to have its own character. But from the point of view of Mahayana Buddhism, you know, nothing doesn't change. Everything's constantly changing. Things are what they are because of their interrelationships. And they're all mind-created, in a sense, at least in some sense. You know, we don't experience things directly. We don't even experience ourselves directly. We experience an image of ourselves. So that is why Mahayana Buddhism, like in texts like the Heart Sutra, would say that things are empty. You know, it's not that I don't have, in some sense, eye, ear, nose, tongue, but really they're empty of any inherent existence. And that seems to be what the classic of purity and stillness is also saying. Okay. Eskildsen says, "Thus, when you have managed to set aside your desires, you can and should be able to see and understand that you, both as a self-conscious mind and a physical body, and all the things around you lack inherent existence. You and they are empty. But it is also to be understood that even this emptiness is a concept, that stands valid only on the basis of a particular way of viewing things, because viewed from another angle, all that is empty also has a temporary provisional existence. So emptiness is just a way of talking about things, so you can kind of relate better to their ungraspable nature, but that doesn't mean they're not there at all. With this total unbiased perspective on things, it becomes possible to be detached from everything, including even the concept of emptiness in the tranquility of detachment itself. So you're not attached to being detached. Got it? So that gives like a total freedom, a freedom to pick up and a freedom to put down. So, back to the text. All's rest devoid of mark, how should desires fix tooth? When they are past, thou surely hast the silence of the truth. Flawless that truth and fixed, yet apt to each appeal, nature and sense to influence, the magnet to the steel. Oh, this true touch withal, elastic and exact, that yet above their tides the silence free from act. And here we're in a commentary. Eskildsen again says, thus we are told the mind that is free of desires is also immune from the danger of engendering new desires. Because you are unattached to the tranquility of detachment, you are willing and able to respond to things, but in doing so you never lose the inner calm that is most basic to your nature. Such a condition is the constant clarity and calmness. And, I find this funny, but when I was growing up, my dad would try to get me into like Little League baseball and would take me out to play base catch with him and all that. And I just really hated that. I wanted to be left alone in my room to read or something. But now, what comes to me when I read this is what I learned from my dad when he was taking me out to play baseball, which was the posture you take in the outfield, like this, and with your catcher's mitt and everything. And you just had to be there with nothing on your mind, just being purely attentive. And from this posture, you could move anywhere. I could go this way and go this way. I could start running back. And so I think about that now. That is the kind of mental posture this passage is saying we should have. Open, empty, but totally able to respond quickly in any direction as needed. And if you don't need to respond, just stay there. Just maintain that kind of stable, flexible posture. So thanks, Dad. This old baseball practice helped me understand Daoism better. Okay, back to the text. He that hath this shall come little by little a breath. So floweth he now to truth of Tao, wherein he vanisheth. Men style him Lord of Tao, yet he hath none to lord. Hid motive he of all that be, enough for his reward. He that can comprehend this doctrine may transmit, this sacred Tao to men that vow themselves to fathom it. So, Eskildsen once more. Thus here we have presented the ultimate religious paradox, namely, that the highest religious attainment involves understanding that there is nothing to be gained through religious striving. Any notion that there is something to be gained is merely a ploy devised by compassionate beings to appeal to people who are unable to think in terms other than those of gain. So, make of that what you will. Back to the text. Now we're into the, apparently the text can be broken down into 2 pages, although, as I showed earlier, it all fits nicely on 1 page, but James Lake, for whatever reason, divided into 2. So, and actually the second part's much shorter than the first, so we're about 2/3 done here. And a lot of the heavy lifting has already happened. Lao Chun the Master said, the adept in skill of soul hath never an aim, the buckler's shame is he that gropes a goal. Who most possesses the day, conceal their magic power, who least possess, exert their strength, 7 times in every hour. Those who cling fast to powers, who guard them and display their magic art, they are not part of Dao nor yet of day. So here's a passage from the Tao Te Ching that would reflect on that, especially the first line. Those who possessed perfectly the powers did not manifest them, and so they preserved them. Those who possessed them imperfectly feared to lose them, and so lost them. The former did nothing, nor had need to do. The latter did, and had need to do. Those who possessed benevolence exercised it, and had need of it. So also was it with them who possessed justice. Those whom possessed the conventions displayed them, and when men would not agree, they made ready to fight them. Thus, when the Tao was lost, the magic powers appeared. Then, by successive degradations, came benevolence, justice, convention. Now, convention is the shadow of loyalty and goodwill, and so the herald of disorder. Yea, even understanding is but a blossom of the Tao, and foreshadoweth stupidity. So then the Tao man holdeth the mass, and avoideth motion. He is attached to the root, not to the flower. He leaveth the one, and cleaveth to the other. So the idea here is that when you're doing what you should be doing, when you are following your true will, you don't need to make an excessive display of virtue. But when you're not doing that, and when society isn't following the natural best way, then suddenly you need to make a big display of virtue and of strength. And then he's showing this sort of degradation. You go from a more natural, spontaneous way of doing things to a way where you have to display benevolence, and then when there's not enough benevolence, suddenly you start talking about justice and law and order, and then when that's not good enough, then you start using force. So it just keeps falling down. Okay. Another passage, this would be 41. The best students, learning of the Tao, set to work earnestly to practice the way. Mediocre students now cherish it, now let it go. The worst students mock at it. Were it not thus mocked, it were unworthy of the Tao. Thus spake the makers of saws. That's Crowley's rather odd way of translating the makers of epigrams or wise sayings. The Tao at its brightest is obscure, who advanceth in that way retireth. Its smooth way is rough, its summit is a valley, its beauty is ugliness, its wealth is poverty, its virtue is vice, its stability is change, its form is without form, its fullness is vacancy, its utterance is silence, its reality is illusion. Nameless and imperceptible is the Tao, but it informeth and perfecteth all things. So again, it's talking about balance, keeping everything in balance, and that it's better to be understated than trying to make a big deal where you create even more disturbance than you were trying to resolve. Back to the text. Men win not truth of Tao, because their minds are wry. The mind uncurbed, the self perturbed, and loses tune of tide. Lost the external lures, they turn to seek it then. All things perplex, confuse, and vex those miserable men. Disordered thoughts arise, body and mind grow sick. Disgrace and fear grow year by year to their climacteric. Wild they are tossed about, through life and death they quiver, sunk in sea stress of bitterness, and lose the Tao forever. So, here, whereas in the first part of the text, it was describing the Tao generally, and then talking about taking up a way of cultivating purity and stillness. Here it's talking about what happens if you don't do that. You'll end up in the bitter sea of birth and death. So here again we see the Buddhist influence poking through. This is birth or life, this is death. This would be bitterness or suffering or anguish, and this would be the ocean or sea. And sometimes in Buddhist texts, they talk about the being reborn in the hells and among the hungry ghosts, and as an animal, and as a human, and even as a god. Even the god realm's not good enough because you can't stay there forever and will fall back into the other ones. So from a Buddhist point of view, Humanity is good because there's not too much pleasure, so you don't get complacent, and not too much suffering, so that you're able to kind of have a moment of peace of mind to cultivate, but you're still kind of in the middle between all this like vast suffering of hell and the monumental setup, which is heaven. And you just keep going up and down, and that's called the bitter seed of birth and death. So here this supposedly Taoist text is making reference to what is basically a very Buddhist worldview. And back to the text. The true abiding Tao, who understanding hath, who hath the Tao as here and now in silence of the path. So, actually that's the last line. Lake says, James Lake says, our brief classic thus concludes, and our commentator, Lee, thus sums up his remarks on it. The men who understand the Tao do so simply by means of the absolute purity, and the acquiring of this absolute purity depends entirely on the putting away of desire, which is the urgent practical lesson of the treatise. That's pretty lame, because I think the text is talking about more than just putting away desire. It is talking about finding that equilibrium. And I think Crowley is correct to read into it following one's true will, because that's the way of non-conflict. Eskildson says, note here that clarity and calmness, namely serenity, figures in this last paragraph not as something expected to bring forth certain favorable outcomes, but rather as the goal that is to be desired in and of itself. One might perhaps also add, based on what the text stated earlier, that in gaining this serenity, you really gain nothing at all, for serenity is a propensity that you possessed all along. And here I'll also end with a quotation from Crowley from Magic Without Tears. This is the hardest question. The writer, he's responding to a woman who asked him, what is the Tao? This is the hardest question you have yet to put to me. To explain the Tao, the only proper answer would be silence. Trust to the slow dispersion and absorption of the disturbance created by your asking it. In that sentence, there lies really the whole explanation. But I see well enough that it won't do for you. You are not yet old or wise enough to understand that the only way to clear muddy water is to leave it alone. With that, I end.
Right.